That was nice.
That was nice, guys.
We'll be quiet for 3 seconds.
It was 7. I actually just watched something on that, though, how different
Me and Kendall
consciousness
been meditating
experience
for
time
30
differently.
minutes every morning.
That's awesome.
For 3 minutes?
You did what? Meditated?
No, seriously,
That's something.
I know.
Just
That's something.
I need to get...
Alright, that's a good start, yeah.
I'm trying to get...
Is it like mindfulness meditation? Or
Yeah, it's like a nap thing.
waking up? The waking up course?
I don't know.
No? Okay.
Waking up is Sam's.
I know he has a meditation app.
Yeah. And then there's the... I have one. A Calm. One called Calm.
I
Wow.
like watching
You guys using your tech to help your health and shit. God.
Dude, yeah, dude.
I found this
so cool.
app that's called Weekly, and it has like it has you can set up things that you want to do and like how many times you want to do them, and you can like check it off as you go, and it'll like graph your progress. And
Oh, I like that.
And you can.
I want that. I was going to do
Yeah, and then you have that video
Okay.
game one that gives you like stats you're working on and shit.
that. Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Which one is it? Which one's yours?
It's called Weekly, but I don't know if it's on Android.
That's such a good idea. I always end up
Super good.
when I like I don't know, I end up distancing myself from technology for periods of time when I'm just feeling like shit's too much.
You just gotta use technology for yourself, though. You know what I mean?
I know it's got good applications, but
Yeah.
It's just a hole you can fall into. Yeah. Continuously checking Facebook and shit.
Dopamine.
Yeah.
Facebook is dumb.
Yeah, Facebook is.
it is dumb. It's still a place I get all my news just because I have all of my sources liked on there.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It's really bad for that though, because the algorithms specifically send you shit that's like gonna outrage you or that you'll agree with.
Right.
Either of those.
Yeah.
So,
Well, to be fair, I feel like I'm outraged either way.
well, that's not good though.
That's fair. That's very fair. Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot. Just
Yeah.
where's the line between like staying informed and your own mental health?
Well, yeah, and
Especially
just
in
how
times
you're
like
informed
these.
too, and
Yeah.
how you're staying informed. Because I do think Facebook is like the most unhealthy way to do that
Mm.
because of that. Because of the algorithms trying to
Right.
addict you, basically. you
Right.
know? So it's not.
For sure.
It's not trying to inform you.
Definitely.
It's trying to keep you there as long as possible.
And I may be getting informed on the side, but that's not the main. The main
I think
course.
it's just, I feel like trying to find some editorials that you actually like and then just reading them every once in a while, you know?
Yeah, I do that. I definitely am happiest when I'm actually reading long form articles
Right.
rather than just seeing the headlines every day.
Yeah.
You know, sitting down for like diving into something with YouTube. But I also have noticed a clear distinction between like learning about stuff, even if it's political, but if it's more like a deep dive versus like,
Oh, yeah.
you know, even a substantive article about the news of the day
Yeah.
is still more stressful because it's like part of that daily. And then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and it just feels like it's building. Something's building.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is, you're observing problems that you can't have any effect on.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it is like, and you can't shut that away.
Yeah.
You know, you can try to not mind it.
And for the record, I'm not someone complaining about hearing about Trump every day. I don't give a fuck about Trump. We're talking mainly about, you know, seeing the progress of climate and you know, political corruption and more of the long road.
Yeah, I definitely get sad every time I see an article about how net neutrality is dying.
Yeah, shit like
Like-
that, or you know,
It's like-
more censorship or more surveillance.
It's
or
like it's had his head cut off, and then it's like still trying to talk, and people are like stepping on that.
Yeah.
That's like so sad. And there's this one guy over there with like stitches, and he's like, "I could sew it back on," and they're like, "Fuck you."
Oh, were we gonna make like an intro so we don't have to do our intros anymore while we're on the mic?
Yes, we should do that.
We should do that because we didn't do an intro on this one, so we'll just put it at the front.
Okay,
Awesome.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that at the end.
Sure.
That'd be good. Like a little say hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Whatever, and you know, this is I'm what's his face. And
Yeah.
This is fuckhead and whatnot. All that kind of good stuff.
It'd be funny to see if we
That's-
like.
that sounds good.
Seeing
We
it,
should just
seeing-
keep that. We should just sample that, and that's
It's
it.
funny to imagine us
Done.
getting all like polished and stuff, and having more viewership in the future, and then
You got
people like going back and listening to this and being like,
Stuart trying to...
"This is funny."
We'll delete these ones.
I think it's kind of cool
Yeah,
seeing it like
it is.
grow organically. But
Yeah.
anyway,
one of the regulars at the shop, he was trying to find it, and I was like, yeah,
I don't don't know if we're ready.
It's a little hard. No, I told him, but it's hard to find. Yeah.
It is. You can send him a link. That's the
Yeah, that's what I think would probably be the easiest way.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I put the links in that Facebook.
I don't think that he'll necessarily like it, but constructive criticism is always good.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're not putting it out there for people to like.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If we're chasing praise, then we're in it for the wrong reasons.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
Fuck it.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm gonna try to record like some preliminary drum things too to use so that you can ask you guys if that's what you want.
Yeah,
And then
definitely.
we can do it with that sometime. Or your fancy mic if you get a really nice one.
Yeah, hopefully.
That'd be cool.
Hopefully, I think I might.
That'd be awesome.
So we'll see. It's got like the little shield and everything.
Oh shit.
Oh. And it's got like one of the, so we can move around and
Okay.
We have one of those.
Do we really? Well, don't worry about it right now.
It's right there.
Oh well, we're good.
Okay.
I don't think that makes too much difference unless you're in front of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
directly talking in front of it.
Yeah.
It's just to diffuse the air so that you're not like
Gotcha.
like that kind of sound,
Yeah.
in the crackle. So.
Yeah, so did we want to talk about?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think this was good.
Yeah, we're good.
Call it good for the day.
Francie Pill or...
Yeah, so we had a lot of different stuff we want to talk about. We still haven't.
Francie poo.
Francie Poo.
Yeah, I don't know.
Those are my people, Drew. Come on.
It's serious, okay?
Yeah. Whoa. That's my heritage.
Let me
Francie poo.
reel it back. I mean, Sir France.
Sir France-a-lot.
Yes.
Yeah, so we got a lot of stuff.
Sir and Madam.
We still need to talk about the midterms. We need to talk about some of the stuff coming up about 2020. There was just a climate conference in Poland, and of course the Yellow Vest movement in France.
We were going to talk about education too.
Yes, education.
somewhere in there.
I just saw this is related, but just kind of something I saw randomly the other day is they just had another really definitive study showing that when students come to class later in the day, especially in high school, they do much better. And yet there's almost no movement in terms of implementing like this very clear objective understanding that is better.
I don't get it.
My
It would
theory-
work better too with
I think honestly it's because they want us to get used to showing up early to do shit we don't want to do.
Yeah.
That's what I think it is.
I could definitely see that.
Because that's what the work life is.
But it should
So
be
it's not
straight
about
then to,
actually
like, 9 to
educating you
5.
better.
It should be straight to 9 to 5. You get there at 9, work, go to school until 5.
Yeah,
And your parents.
That sounds awful.
that does sound awful.
Yeah, I mean, I think education's always been something that's like pretty near to my heart, but it gets really weird when you're talking about all the different like philosophies on education because it always depends on what we're trying to educate them for.
Well, that's always the thing is I think we all come at it from an understanding within ourselves that education's goal is to educate people.
Your thing.
And yet I feel like the ruling societal understanding is that it's to prepare you for working.
Yeah, training.
Yeah.
It's like training.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I mean, obviously it shows that there's like the larger philosophy of like capitalism and imperialism and stuff like that overwhelms the educational process. I mean, it's like the whole idea of like liberal arts and stuff is totally lost
Oh, yeah.
today. I mean, that's the one thing that I probably you and Jordan Peterson would actually agree on is like he talks about how even the social studies in general right now are just like the humanities are completely fucked.
Oh,
just
they're
because
trashed.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so like that is like that's our attempt. That's our attempt at like throwing the bone to the arts when we're like, capitalistically oriented and we have to be all this practicality and like, economics is first and
Well, it's just so upsetting to me. It always has been upsetting. I mean, this is really what I think started my political journey from the very beginning is like, why aren't we educated to facilitate our role as democratic citizens first?
Yeah.
And the answer is because they care more about our role as capitalist workers.
totally. And
Which
it's-
makes sense because if we're democratic citizens, we're a threat to their power.
Well, and when when you are taking it from a practicality standpoint, it's difficult because you want to make it so that the people who are more apt towards that kind of learning where it is purely practically oriented and economically oriented and resource oriented. You want those people to succeed because you want to be able to collect as many resources for the country as possible.
For sure.
Because it's secure. But the problem is, it's like there's the lack of faith that comes from the common man being able to be educated. You know, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy where you say the common man is not going to be like good enough. It's not going to actually give, I don't know, enough benefits to the country to train them as well as we think they should be.
So upsetting.
In a generalized education.
Right.
I mean, if you have a society where sovereignty lies with the citizenry, then your incentive should be to give them every possible, opportunity for growth and self-actualization possible.
I agree. It is definitely an interesting question, though, of like, what should the baseline be?
Right.
Like, where should we draw the line of like, everyone should know this much stuff?
Right.
We have gone through this much
Yeah.
education. Because, like, if you ask different people, you obviously get different answers. Like, should everyone know calculus? Like, I mean, it'd be nice, right? That'd be great if everyone could do that, but it's unlikely that that's going to work out. And then you start thinking, what are most people capable of, and what are the most important things that they would know?
See, and then we have whole types of people that it's just difficult for them to even fit into the system,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You have the artsy creative types, and they're just like, well, I'm being told that everything I'm good at is useless.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Well, and even if we look at it from that practical approach of like trying to think of things like economically and stuff like that, that lends itself more towards the whole like child labor and shit like that, where you get people into training at the actual job as quickly as possible.
Right.
But we still have this weird like Frankenstein-y kind of thing where you go to college and you're supposed to be, getting a higher education and learning things that aren't going to be necessarily practical because we decided it's good for a human to learn those things, but then we don't even we half-heartedly did it.
Yeah,
well, I think that's
good point.
That's one of the core problems, I think, in our society is because we have a lot of cognitive dissonance and I think even schizophrenic cultural tendencies, because the difference between the story we tell ourselves about our society and the reality of it are really gigantic.
Yeah.
I mean, we tell ourselves very flowery tales about what this country is.
Yeah.
And it's just very different from the reality of it. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, like, that would be... The interesting part is that would be why the social studies even occurred, right? Because it's like the idea of trying to come from this, like, objective point of view of how the nation works or how cultures work or anything like that is to actually get the data so that we can make a story that's in line, just like history, right? You go and you have to try to take the pieces that you find about these cultures that are like thousands of years old, or at least like anthropology and archaeology, history, you get a little bit more because you get like the documents, but it's like trying to figure out like from the actual data what occurred, not what is this mythological like story that we tell ourselves about who we are.
Well, and then if you realize the myth doesn't match up, it's, well, do you just tell new stories to adapt to the reality, or do you demand the reality change to line up with a more, acceptable narrative of who we are and who we want to be?
Well, I mean, I think it always comes from that standpoint. Like, it's weird for me because it's like, it seems psychologically it works the same way for the individual as it does for the state in this case, which is that it's like, or I guess should say the group, but you try your best to tell a story that is authentic to where we are now and then set goals for the future. It's kind of like you don't want to go in and like one of the things that always comes to mind when I'm thinking about this is like when you're working on something like going to the gym because you have a goal of working out and becoming stronger. It's like you can't just tell yourself that you're going to be able to go to the heaviest weights and lift them, because if you do, shit's going to break. It's like in Flint, you can't just say that we have good infrastructure and that people are going to have water for a prolonged period of time, so let's work on these other projects.
So you're saying there's negative outcomes to lying to ourselves about the way the world is?
What? I know. Well, and
I
of course,
don't believe that.
No.
No.
Everything's be fine.
But if it was that obvious, first we wouldn't do it. because there are benefits that we get from it, and second, it would be discussed more. It's the problem is there are benefits to lying to yourself. It's more.
For sure.
It comes more from like
For
a
sure.
like social aspect.
In the short term, usually.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, yeah, humans are the best at thinking long term out of all creatures.
Don't do it
But
very often.
Suck at it though.
yeah, and that's why for me, it's like those things that we, I think, as a group are able to acknowledge and like acknowledge the limitations of humanity and stuff like that. I really think a lot of people either don't know them or they're so frightening that they don't want to acknowledge it.
Right.
I think that's been the case for really ever. I mean, I think that's the idea of like the issue with liberalism and traditionalism. It's like the traditionalists want to keep the story because they think the story's working. They think it's going to work forever. And it's like the liberals come along and say, yo, we're totally neglecting this part. At least this is like the pure good version of both of like.
Well, that's so. I never feel like I
liberals.
line up in those because, like, in a lot of ways, I feel like while I'd be considered very left wing, I'm adhering to stories that I feel like are older than the ones we're telling ourselves now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
Things about like, democracy and liberty and all these different things that I feel like have a longer tradition than the traditions we're defending.
Those are just silly little bedtime stories.
Yeah.
well,
totally.
let's also not the difficulty too is like let's not. They're older traditions, but they haven't been happening.
Right. Right.
So like it's
Well,
like
even
they
going
were
back to, like,
ideas.
yeah, they were. Yeah.
And they were
ideas.
implemented at some point,
So I mean,
and
even
then they
going
worked
to
for
like
thousands of years.
the words of the Declaration of Independence, that it's not mashing up with the world we live in.
Right.
So even if you're just taking it within the American mythology, I still feel, in a sense, to be upholding traditions in my shaking of the system that exists.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
Well, and this is where, like, for me, it's so interesting to look at the traditional kind of confusion, the people who are more traditionally oriented confusion with, like, dogmatic points of view versus the conservation of archetypes that we think are correct. Like liberty and
Right.
freedom and democracy, those are all archetypes. They're not, like, strict rules. There's obviously some rules that you can say, like, this is obviously not democracy. But you have to be like, okay, well, democracy in general is great, but maybe in some places it's not great.
Right.
And we need to
And where
apply
should
it.
it be and in what forms?
Exactly. And so you have to define the system where it works well. But
Yeah.
you don't, the idea is you don't get locked into no, we can't change this written sentence because if we change this written sentence, it'll fuck the whole system up.
Right.
And it's like, no, you're holding on to the wrong part. You're not holding on to the idea that was good. You're holding on to the kind of the data that came from that. And I guess that's more Platonic. That's like the Platonic idea of that, the ideals. But I think that's like this, we need to have that discussion with education.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? What is the ideal of education? What is it for? Because it's so cultural. It's like, from a cultural point of view, education is almost always associated with the humanity's ability to give information to the offspring that they could not have yet. They don't have information for it. They don't have data. That's one of the humanity's biggest things.
Yeah.
That's why we constantly update, and why children are can become so much smarter than the adults, because our brains are growing quicker. They can consume way more information and file it away. And the older adults are supposed to be like, hey, this is stuff we've learned. You have no idea what that is because you've never experienced it. But here's a story you might understand, and you may understand the concept when it comes along.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah, I think. Well, and then also like in high school, like just with a GED, you're not really going to get a high-paying job. You're not going to actually be able to survive off of that. So it's not.
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't
what
even-
we're giving in the society is not what they can use to succeed. They have to go pay $150,000 to get a 4-year degree, and now even a bachelor's is not even worth that much anymore.
No,
Totally.
no. That's like almost bare minimum now.
I mean, Stuart, like always. I mean, he's cool. I really like him as a resource because he comes from a baby boomer perspective,
Right.
and he's also like he
Tries to keep up on shit and has opinions.
And talks to us. And like the cool thing is he's like actually writing articles that are going into journals, and he has only a bachelor. He's not a doctor. He keeps, like he told me the other day, he keeps getting emails from these doctors who are calling him Dr. Rose, and he's like, I'm not a doctor.
Dude,
I'm a bachelor's
if you know how to
degree.
write a good article and back it up with evidence, they'll usually
But that's
put it in
like,
there.
but do you think that that's the case for most bachelor students today?
No. But
So
I also
that's-
don't think most are trying to do that kind of thing.
But that's, I think, the thing. He comes from a place of that was what he was trying to do.
Right.
A bachelor's was supposed to mean something. If you were a professor, you were the shit. Like, you're not a normal person if you're a professor. If you're a bachelor's, you're still not a normal person.
See, but I also don't think we, within the school system, take that very seriously. Because, like, when I think of my education getting a bachelor's degree, I don't feel like it was very rigorous education. Maybe that's just because I was good at getting decent grades and not doing what they wanted.
Well, no, I mean...
I agree, though. I don't think
agree.
they put us through that much.
No.
It was like, there's a lot of hoop jumping.
Yeah, hoop
and not a
jumping,
lot of
that's not
learning
substantive.
and challenge.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's, I think...
There were tasks that were difficult to do,
Exactly.
but not because they were substantive.
Right.
Well, I think this almost comes from a place of like, or it comes from an idea of how poor the idea of our education system is now, because the fact that we're all feeling like stressed out when we can like objectively look at it and be like, well, this wasn't actually that hard. Why did it seem so hard? Why is it so hard to do my homework?
Yeah.
Why is it so hard to go to a boring class all the time? It's like, maybe because it's literally not a good way of doing school. Maybe humans do not do this well.
Well, I know for sure that I learn better outside the classroom, like 9 times out of 10.
Totally.
Sometimes I'll get a good teacher, and that is not true. But
Right.
9 times out of 10, it's the case that I educate myself better than classroom does.
Totally.
The ridiculous thing to me is if we are what we say we are, a capitalist society, the idea of school is to line you up with a job so you can support your society, build it up. But we're not even doing that. Like I feel like a service, like one of the trade schools is like one of the only like where you go directly to a trade school. For 2 years, you learn exactly what you're going to learn on the job, and then you're lined up exactly with the person. So you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
Versus like the universities, they seem like it is just a lot of hoop jumping, a lot of trying to shape you into this perfect person or, you know, educate you about
But they're not even
all of
actually trying to
society.
do that.
Yeah.
Well, it's the intellectualism, as though like that's like the quintessential university is the intellectuals' place. It's not a training center for
Yeah,
jobs.
it's about the free, creative pursuing and expression of ideas and thoughts and,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
curiosity and seeking of knowledge for knowledge's sake.
Yet I think there's been a conflation of the trade school as well as the
It's because
university.
we've been taught that getting a degree is your ticket to a job that doesn't suck.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, and that actually will give us enough money to
people
like
look
have
at
children
it as
and
like
take care of
a
them.
trade
and-
school voucher. That's
Yeah.
Right,
like,
yeah.
Well, because it's bare minimum, right?
Yeah.
That's like
Yeah, to
the
Well,
get the
and-
American dream, you need to go to
and as we're moving to a 2-class society, as the middle class erodes, I mean, people are really seeing, well, this is the gate to not being among the poor.
yeah.
Right. And it is also, the other thing that's happening too is that jobs are becoming more and more complicated. And
Right.
so it's not as easy to have trade schools anymore. Like you basically do need to have people that can think
Yeah,
for themselves.
yeah.
And
Well, it's
what
More
university's
technical
supposed to be.
expertise.
I think it's also because the creativity aspect is so high too.
Yeah.
You know, that's I
It's
think
gonna be way
I think
more
it's more that it's because like the other thing is like if you dedicate yourself to something and you're actually getting like good enough resources and good pay for it, you can learn a shit ton of things if you're taught correctly.
Right.
You can learn a root job pretty quick.
Yeah.
And it's like we have somehow said that like I almost see it as like a bastardization of what I think a lot of people would really like. If we all like looked at the United States and said everyone went to what was supposed to be a university, like the classic example of like, you've done enough to where you're thinking about more shit. Like you're thinking about shit that is not purely practical. That would be like, for me, I guess the university, the exchange of ideas of like things that we can do to improve the systems that we already have that are taking care of all of our practical application. It's like, if everyone went to that, that would be like, we wouldn't like, what we do is we get together and we talk about cool ways to make the world better, and then we do it because we're already skilled enough to do that.
And I do wish there was a lot of practical education in school too, but not even necessarily just like trade schooly stuff. Like I feel like everyone should know how to work like the basics of car functioning and car repair. I feel like everyone should know, how to hunt or some wilderness skills or farming. Like we should be learning all these things.
Well, or at least understand the mechanism, like the systems that are in place so that we don't have to learn those.
I know. I guess I feel like people should have that backup. I've been thinking about that a lot because there was this Vice video where they explored like these communes in Canada. And they're like anarchist communes. Like they have no rules except don't be an ass and we'll tell you if you're being an ass, essentially.
Yeah.
And the dude who runs it, he reminded me of your dad, actually, Little Sean, just who never stopped doing shrooms. But he literally does them every day. He grows them up there and he does them every day.
I feel like I would stop doing.
I don't know, but he just said this is just the way my mind is now. but yeah, he was making some good points though, because he was saying like, I feel like these kinds of places should be allowed on the fringes of society, so that in times of economic distress, people can fall into them like a safety net. Because he talked about how there was a huge explosion of them after the 2008 financial crisis, but then quickly, especially in the United States, they tried to crack down on them. And it's like, well, we should have these little, we should be secure enough to allow like societies that are on the fringes of our society, that don't have to play by our rules, that are able to survive in the real world, so that if our constructed one begins to fall apart, we can fall back into that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I think the cool thing about teaching those skills that you were talking about is they are obvious grounds for teaching other things.
Right.
Like, if you
they're
go
all
and learn...
very relatable to other fields, and you learn more about the world and how it works. Having hands-on, practical understanding of things, I think is very useful.
Well, that's definitely something that I think we do really badly. Is we sit kids in a classroom and we just talk at them and expect them to learn something that way, and that's not how humans are meant to learn.
Yeah.
And you end up with all these, problem kids because they want to fucking move around instead of sitting in a chair for 8 hours.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're fucking apes. We didn't evolve to sit down and listen attentively for 8 hours.
Well, earlier we were talking. I mean, there are obviously some people who are more prone to that are totally and we're
very adaptable. So if you train people, you can get a lot out of them.
Yeah, and the whole
it doesn't sit well with a lot.
Education, like when I was like talking about it, culturally, it's like you are handing down information that they couldn't have yet. But I think the difficulty with that is like we could teach them this quickly.
Yeah.
We're not yet, like, the thing that comes to mind first is like talking about dynamics, when I was like trying to learn dynamics, and it was really difficult for me because the math was kind of like complex, but what we were talking about was how does a car move? How does a crankshaft work? And like doing the math to be able to do a crankshaft. So it's like having the idea that like you go and you learn how to fix your car. You have the data you need.
Yeah.
Now you just need to apply another language to it, and then you start to get these actual real world applications. And that stuff I've been saying that throughout my time at university, like really the whole time. It's like if you want to become a biologist, go to we should have labs where you just go and hang out if you want, and like be able to look at some weird microorganisms. Give all the resources that you want to learn how to do the best fucking microscopic work ever.
Yeah, we don't really have that vibrant, like academic, setting where that's going on.
Yeah.
I feel like in school.
Well, there's also this need to not be redundant. like that's also one of the resource oriented idea for university too, is like collect this data that we don't have to have you do the experiment because we'll tell you how it works. And there's almost like this, like, because you do, if we think about it like from a resource standpoint, you save a lot of shit when you don't do that. You don't have to like dye the cells that you need. You don't have to keep growing the cells. You don't, like, from a biological standpoint, or you don't need to buy a bunch of cars that are broken at certain stages so that people can fix them and stuff like that. So instead what you do is you create a simulation, or you create some PowerPoint that takes you step by step through it, this kind of way of saving resources that way. But I think we really need to step back and look at the pros and cons of that. Because I think if you get rid of too much of it, you lose the whole, you lose the application. You lose the real world, like, correspondence to the things that you're learning.
Totally.
The fact that in my head, I can think of how I would analyze an ecological system, that would be cool, but then I don't have any of the resources available to me. That's like, I think that's to me, that's a bummer for me, especially.
Yeah, you can't do anything with your, curiosity.
Right.
And the thing is you have an idea of how to do it. It's just good luck getting what you need. Same with growing things yourself and stuff like that. Again, it's like, you have an idea, we have a resource on the internet to just look things up, and we have no real world resource to go and put it into practice, unless we work at another job.
Yeah, I think that's what schools should be. It should focus on the person and where they are naturally skilled at, which I think is what we excel towards. And then just help that student kind of guide them.
Yeah, instead of trying to put them into a mold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, for you, it was like science was always something that excited you, and it was just like, so school just needs to grab onto those kind of students and just excel them,
run with them. But that's assuming we've built a society that has useful and lucrative functions for every kind of person.
Well, it goes back to what is
which we should. I think that makes perfect sense.
What should we teach everyone? And then a big disconnect with me in school. Well, the practical skills that we were talking about. Where is it that the parent's job to teach you how to change a flat tire, to teach you about basic car maintenance?
Yeah.
Assuming our parents know about that shit.
I don't think that's what they're necessarily there for.
Well,
it's more for the relationship aspect.
Yeah.
They're a human being. They're supposed to teach you human being things, not necessarily from an intellectual point of view.
The issue is, if you have things that you want everyone to know, then you can't
assume that parents are going to do that.
Exactly.
So that's where I come in with the kind of a baseline thing.
Right.
I think that it's important to establish baseline skills.
Right.
And so, I think it'd be really good if we could teach everybody philosophy.
Yeah.
Insofar as it, we don't need to teach them,
the whole history of
the
philosophical
history.
thought.
Yeah. It's more the process, and the same thing with science. Those things are important not because of the information that they contain, but because of how they train you to think.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what we're really lacking is the goal of improving a person's ability to analyze things and to learn for themselves and create their own thoughts and all that kind of stuff.
See, we're getting back to classic democratic education. That's the whole thing with Plato, Teach the basics, teach logic, rhetoric, physics, history, music, things that lay the foundation for everything else you're going to be able to become as a human being.
Exactly. Yeah.
That sounds perfect.
Well, I think, so if we can, I think we all agree on that. I think we all agree that sounds like the most reasonable. So I think it could be profitable to think about why that isn't the case now.
I mean, I tend to think it's economic reasons.
Yeah. Well, and this might come back, in one of the things that pops into my head first is the idea that I was talking about with the creating the availability for the creativity, which obviously is economically related, but it's the idea that don't go touch this thing because it's working pretty well right now. We don't have the resources to make that thing better or to scrap it and do something completely different. We've already used the resources necessary for that, so work on something else.
Well, what's something that you would say fits that description.
Oh, I mean, well, like I think that's one of the problems that we have a lot with like different sources of energy. There's like, or we can talk about like a new renewable types of energy, or you can talk about like just infrastructure in general. Like the other day I was thinking about how it would
I'm kind of confused. So it sounded like you were saying there are certain things we shouldn't teach people because they're working well already.
No. I was saying that that's, I think, how we do it now.
Not
because it's a good way of doing things.
Agreed.
Because if that's true, then probably someone would just need to learn more about that system, and then they would learn that their idea had already been done.
That's definitely a problem right now, is the idea, there's the pervasive ideology of kind of like, you know, everything's amazing, don't question it, don't try to change things, you know. Yeah, it's weird seeing how I thought about society as a kid and just kind of like the messages you received about how like, you know, everything's been figured out and it's just getting better and better and better and we're the good guys and, you know, we beat the bad guys and now things are great. And
I feel like that's pretty typical for kids to think, though. You know, they think that they start off thinking that no one knows anything, and then you ask your parents questions and you find out they know everything.
Yeah.
And then, you know, everything's great. And then as you get older, you're starting to, you know, rip away the veils of those things.
I just feel like we have a lot more veils still in place than we should.
Right.
Like, I mean, adults have a lot of veils still in this society too.
And I think that comes back to how we're taught about things, right? So one of the things I wanted to say about just the way that education is structured and and why I think that we don't do the more like philosophical Greek style is that I think it's harder, right? I think it's much harder to do that. It's harder for the teacher. It's harder to know what you have at the end. You know, it's hard to make a standardized test for that kind of stuff. And so I really think it comes down to how easy it is to set up an education system and then how easy it is to evaluate what you have. Right. And so what we've seemed to have gravitated towards is throwing information at people and seeing what sticks. And then based on what sticks, we can evaluate how well, you know, that person is doing / the education system as a whole is doing. And so what that does from the other perspective, though, is you become a wall that's having a bunch of, you know, spaghetti thrown at you, right? And how much sticks is relative to like what makes sense to you. And so you're not in the position of critically thinking about any of those things.
No.
In school, at least, it's not telling you to, right? Unless you do it yourself. And so what that tells you, if you're to take that at face value, is that they know everything. You're here to learn what everything is. And so then you end up in this position of, okay, just tell me what it is. We already know, right? That's what I'm here for. Just tell me the information.
Which kills your creative interest
Exactly.
as well.
Exactly. And that's not how people learn very well. It's not
really
interesting.
It's really frustrating. The class I'm finishing up right now is on testing in education. And it's just been so frustrating in that class, man. And for one of the papers I did, I was looking into Finland because they have the best education system in the world right now. They do one test a year.
Nice.
One. At the end. And I mean, just the amount of differences they have is insane. Like their teachers are paid on the same level as doctors and lawyers. They're treated with that level of esteem. Classrooms often have more than one instructor.
Nice.
And, you know, switch fluidly from topic to topic and just all these different things. And it's so much better. They have almost no homework. And yet they get better grades. And so it just kind of flies in the face of this whole idea of, well, you have to keep throwing the shit at them or you won't find out how well they're doing. But then it's like, well, if that thing is making them do worse, then what are we doing here?
Right. Yeah, well, sorry, I was just going to say one of the things that I think is really malignant about the way that we teach people is that it teaches us to not like the fact that we don't critically think about things, which is what we're taught to do, then teaches us not to critically think about what we're doing and try to update and make it better. And so even though we have a bunch of evidence, we're not able to, or as a society at least, we're not able to be like, look at all this stuff that tells us what we're doing is wrong and tells us that we should move this way, right? That's that's a thought pattern that you learn if you do like science basically or philosophy. Like those are kind of fundamental thought patterns that you learn. But because we don't learn that way, we're just taught like, tell us what to do and then we'll do it. And so there's no like critical thinking about how to change things and how to update. And we also don't have the critical thinking skills to sort of like evaluate information and say whether or not we think it's true. And so most people rely on emotions for that, or just what they already know.
Well, and then creativity, I think, can only thrive outside of that environment where there's those high stakes. Where you have to perform and you have to achieve what they're telling you to achieve. I mean, I think that's getting worse and worse, especially given the economic context where, students at a young age, their parents are putting all this pressure on them and saying, like, your grades are going to determine whether you're poor or not. Yeah. Right now, 13-year-old, like, how does that make a good learning environment for a child?
Yeah, and plus we know that stress is bad for gaining information.
And you're making them ingest and take onto themselves this kind of mentality of like, I have to bow before the man to, get granted a not shitty class in society. And it's just really gross.
It is.
And the testing environment is like god awful. Just like the one I did, like 200 people in a room and just like filling out Scantrons, just dead quiet.
And it's stupid.
And you get like a break every like 3 hours.
Yeah, and it's stupid too because the fucking time limits, right? Like, why are we trying to evaluate how quickly someone can figure something out?
Right.
Is that really that important?
It's
like if they can get the answer
growing.
Eventually and they get it right, isn't that more important than if they could get it right 15 minutes sooner than the other person, or get it wrong 15 minutes? Like, I don't know. That just seems silly.
Not if we can toss away all those other people.
Yeah. Oh, you're not fast enough for the world. Let's just.
Basically, that's what it is.
Well, that's what it's silly though, because there's so many jobs where people that can mull things over and get the right answer later are way better off than people that skip problems that they don't know the answer to and only answer things that they can answer in 2 seconds.
Yeah,
that's essentially what we're.
And some people I know how I've gotten through tests a lot, especially in high school. Was I just got really good at kind of intuiting which one made the most sense. And more often than not, I was right. I'd get B's and A's on my tests, and I didn't know like 2/3 of the answers. And I was like, all right, yeah.
Yeah.
If you somewhat pay attention and you trust your gut, you can wing a lot of those.
Totally.
Maybe that's what they're trying to teach us the whole
time. Yeah, it's frustrating though.
And the problem is, like, from an economic standpoint, our standards are, like, our test scores are going down. So we need to change, because what we're doing right now is not working.
No.
And, like, I think we're trying to get to a point where we're, like, the intellectual, like, powerhouse of the world, but we're never going to get there if we're in this, like, old traditional education system.
For sure. Yeah, and the whole thing that you mentioned about how Finland pays their teachers way more, that's so
yeah, and it's hard to become a teacher. Smart. You've got to know your shit.
It really should
exactly.
Be. Right now, it's almost like a backup career for people that don't know what they want to do. And they're like, I guess I'll just be a teacher.
Yep.
And then it's like, that's who's shaping the future.
Yeah. And then the ones that are serious about it are under so much economic pressure because of how little you get paid and, all the shitty environment and infrastructure for it.
The people that are like really, really smart can do other things that will get them way more money and will still be fulfilling and will still, contribute to society. But they might have been a teacher otherwise, Yeah,
it's weird to think we have a society where like our best and brightest are figuring out how to move money around on Wall Street. Know, like what kind of
how to manipulate money to make more of it, but you don't actually have more. You just
Jesus. Anyway,
so we took a little bit of a break for some white noise that we had to cut out. So now we're gonna kind of rehash some things, so it'll sound dumb or than normal. But anyway,
it's alright. It's already dumb.
So. Right? It's already fucking dumb.
Self-loathing is good for the soul.
Yeah,
I tell you,
keeps me in check.
Woo! That's how I improve my life.
It's how I stop being a perfectionist.
There you go.
Just up front admit defeat. Just kidding.
Perfect.
Anyway, there is an aspect of truth to that though, which is like if you're a perfectionist, if you just admit your flaws up front, then you're not intimidated by your need to be perfect at things.
Totally.
But anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, so the whole thing that, like we move money around and make more money by doing that, that sounds a lot like rent seeking, which is a term, I had to look it up. It comes from economics, but also public choice theory. But yeah, it's basically just trying to get something without really producing anything.
Yeah, so this reminds me a lot of some interviews I saw with Michael Hudson, who's a famous economist because he was one of the few who predicted the 2008 crash. And he's also a historian, and he was talking about how in classical economics, it was considered that like the landlord classes were not considered part of the productive economy. It's something extracting money from the economy. And he was talking about how it's really like backwards and twisted now because we count that kind of income as part of our GDP as if it's part of our domestic product when you're just because someone owns a piece of property, they're able to extract money from people who require those things to survive.
Totally.
So, I mean, if it's more of like a leech function than a productive function.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that's where the term rent seeking comes from.
Maybe. I don't know.
But yeah, the GDP is a pretty bad measure of the economy.
Yeah.
It's not very efficient or indicative.
This may be all we talk about politically, though.
I know.
Well, yeah, I mean...
GDP and unemployment. And unemployment, again, has a lot of flaws with it.
Huge flaws, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if we could figure out a good, more scientifically standard way of evaluating the systems of a country, other than just those, that would be great.
Well, it's just so difficult because the way you evaluate systems is so wrapped up into the theater of politics.
Yeah. I think there are better ones that economists use. I don't know what they are, but I'm pretty sure that they have other ones that they prefer to use, but we just don't talk about them because...
Politics.
Yeah, politics, basically. And also, there's a lot of, what's the word? There's a lot of power in the incumbency of terms already, so people know what GDP is, and so they're familiar with it. You don't have to explain it, but if we were like, we're going to start using this new term, people would be like, what the fuck is that, Well,
I think the economic field itself and the language it uses is intentionally very difficult to understand.
I really liked when we thought like the Earth was like the center of the solar system and the universe. So like I don't know, like updating it to be like heliocentric that's like a lot.
Really,
you know what I mean?
Pretty lame.
Sounds like an existential trip.
That sounds like we're gonna have to change a lot of things. So let's just keep it.
Get a new watch.
Exactly. Yes. And what use really could it be anyways? What would we learn? From changing to something that's more realistic.
I'm trying to make a point here, Drew.
Oh yeah, I don't. No, I mean that's why we should keep it the same.
Okay.
And
glad we're on the same page.
Cool.
Yes.
All right. Well, there's education. So, what's some other stuff we're going to talk about? What's interesting to you guys right now among our topics?
Well, let's get the midterms out of the way since they're already gone.
Midterms, a little late to the party on that one.
We could just do a quick recap.
So I mean, Democrats won the House. From my point of view as a leftist, it was kind of a mixed bag. A lot of progressives did win, but then there were some other really promising candidates that didn't. I mean, there was like, West Virginia, there was, what's his name? Richard Ojeda. And this was really interesting. He's a veteran. He voted for Trump. But then he came out as like a sort of a Bernie-style progressive and saying that like, and he almost won. He got like 40-something% of the vote in a state that went to Trump by 40 points.
Jesus.
So, I mean, he almost beat like an establishment Republican running as a Democrat in deep red country by running on populist leftist policies and saying we need to get back to our roots and the New Deal and representing the working man and all that kind of jazz. So
sounds like a communist.
Well, it just shows because the Democratic Party is fighting tooth and nail to convince themselves that they don't need to go left, that they can stay corporate, that they can stay establishment, that the way for Democrats to win is to keep appealing to conservatives. And I think what Trump and Bernie show is that there's an emerging bipartisan consensus in the population for working class populism. And that a lot of the traditional left-right stuff isn't what people are focused on.
Yeah.
And we're still fighting over that shit because it's in the media, the culture wars, all that bullshit.
Totally.
But I mean, anti-establishment, genuine populist policies are going to get a lot of bipartisan support.
Yeah, it seems like when the Democrats go gun control, identity politics, and like trying to pander to the middle, then they just fail. They fall on their heads.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah, they're just being Republicans, but they're being worse at it.
Yeah, right.
And then adding in like unsubstantive bullshit left-wing stuff.
Exactly.
And it's like, okay.
People are just upset by that.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
It's nothing like the New Deal version of the Democratic Party.
Totally. Do you remember how the gubernatorial elections broke down?
Yeah, there was a huge swing towards the Democrats, but that's not saying a lot because, I mean, local seats were almost entirely held by Republicans. I mean, people don't realize that under Obama, most local seats, whether it be governorships or, state senate, all that kind of stuff, were wiped out.
Damn.
I mean, Republicans controlled almost everything on the local level.
Jeez.
So,
do you know if that tends to happen? Where
not that bad.
Okay.
No, it was particularly bad.
There is a trend for that, though.
Yeah,
yes, it was just exaggerated.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people will say that that's because of race, and I don't want to say that that's not an aspect. Certainly, there were people on the right who didn't like Obama because they have some racial issues. But I think the main issue was that he promised to be a genuine populist progressive in all of his rhetoric. Hope and change, telling us that he was going to flip the system over after 2008, and then he didn't.
Yeah.
That's what I think it is. I mean, we were lied to. If you think of the real message that was happening, we, the American people, were willing to gamble on big change.
Totally.
And he didn't give it to us.
Well, it's also interesting to me, too. There's a huge precedent, and I know it's a pretty old precedent now, but of the presidents promising a bunch of shit that they don't have very much control over.
Right.
Like, we're gonna, I'm gonna make healthcare, and it's like, okay, I mean, you can sign a healthcare bill, but you can't do shit to make it, other than put pressure on the people that actually make those.
But that is the thing too, is how hard are you going to fight for it? So, like for example, there was a Democratic supermajority, and they had the votes to pass a public option, and they settled for Obamacare, which is, I mean, it's nothing. It's bullshit.
Totally.
We should have had a public option at minimum.
Totally. Well, I guess all I'm saying is that I think people have a tendency to blame the president for a lot to
That's a fair point.
They don't necessarily have much control.
That's a fair point.
Now, I'm not saying
dictator.
I'm not saying that he couldn't have done more.
Yeah.
To make good on his promises, and I believe that he should have.
Yeah.
But there's also when they campaign for a bunch of this stuff, I'm just like, you don't have shit to do with that. Hardly,
See, that's a really fair point, and I'll forgive a president for sure as long as it appears that they're fighting,
right,
and they're fighting seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, when I look at Obama's actions, whether it be his response to the banks, not breaking them up, the stimulus package, the toothless Dodd-Frank, all these different things where it's like, I don't know. He's part of the ruling class, and he just wanted to return things to stability. He didn't want to try to fix the underlying problems that caused the crisis, yet his rhetoric indicated that that's what he was going to do.
Yeah, I agree. He almost strikes me as a little bit of a shyster in that regard.
Yeah.
Like, he basically played us.
He's a very charming, skilled politician.
Yep.
And even if he's the kind of guy I would enjoy having a beer with, that's the liberal version of conservatives voting for George Bush. I mean, it's asinine.
Yeah.
You don't vote for someone because they charm you.
Right. Yeah. Totally. One thing that I wanted to say about the gubernatorial elections is that they're important more so than they are normally, because in 2020 there'll be the redistricting.
Oh, yeah.
That will occur. So
I know they swung. I don't know if it's a majority now or Democrats, but there was a huge swing towards Democrats for governor races, and they won in a few red states. Like the governor of Michigan is now a Democrat. That's a red state.
Interesting.
Most of the time. Where else? I forget. And there were a few that were really close. Like Andrew Gillum almost won Florida governor. That was really close. Yeah. But anyway.
Gerrymandering is one of those interesting things where there's like certain cases where it seems completely fucked up, right? but there's also certain cases where it actually makes a lot of sense to gerrymander in weird and unusually seeming ways.
How so?
Because the district then represents the majority of so if you have a state where if you just cut them as rectangles,
Right.
you would get all of them Democratic. Whereas if you draw a few weird lines, then you get one or two Republicans. Obviously,
I'd like to see it proportionate. Yeah. So
because it makes sense, right? That you have certain places that are heavily conservative, that they have some sort of representation,
right.
where in their district they are getting some of the things that they care about and stuff like that. So there's a certain amount of gerrymandering that makes sense, but then the people in power tend to go crazy with it and make it so that it just benefits them rather than the people, which is where it becomes a huge problem.
Yeah, speaking of that makes me think of with something like that, I wish it was representative. So if 2 out of 10 of a given population is Republican, 2 of the districts should be Republican, or etc. But I feel the same way with the Electoral College. We should not do winner take all.
I agree.
For every state.
Yeah.
It's absolutely asinine. It makes you just if you're a Republican in Oregon, you just think, well, there's no point in me voting. Or if you're a Democrat in Louisiana, there's no point in you voting. And if you're a presidential candidate, you spend almost all of your time in 4 or 5 states because of the electoral math. But if it was representative, if say 30% vote for the Republican in California, that's still a fuck ton of votes, and now you need to go there.
Totally.
Suddenly every state's competitive. Suddenly every vote matters.
At that point, is that any different from a popular vote, though?
I don't know. I don't know enough about that.
There'd be percentages that would be different.
I think depending on how many electoral votes are allotted, I think having the electoral system at all definitely favors the less populous states, right?
I guess it does a little bit because you always have
otherwise
2 senators,
right?
And so you're at minimum you have 3.
So that
votes.
favors the less populous states.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the Senate, 100%.
Yeah.
The fact that
how
every
that's where
state
the
gets
Electoral College
2.
comes from is how many representatives plus senators.
Gotcha.
But I thought it was that the House is representatives. But we vote when we do Electoral College. If we say that all of our representatives are one party, then that really is just saying whatever really our senators are going to be, right? So our senators get all the votes.
No,
our senators get to do with whatever they want to with those votes.
No, they're separate from the Electoral College. It's we have electorates that actually vote, right? Isn't that right, Dan? There's electorates that vote. It's not the senators that are voting.
No, the Electoral College is different.
Yeah.
And, I'm a little rusty on the Electoral College, honestly. But I know there's people appointed to vote for each state.
Right.
And some of them are required to vote with how their state voted. Others are not. It seems really convoluted to me.
But isn't if we say how their state voted, is that based off of population?
Well, that's what he was talking about getting rid of, right? So there are certain states where if 51% of the people in the state vote for a given candidate, then the whole electoral, all the electorates for that state go there. So he was saying that we should make it so that all states are proportional in that 51% voted for this candidate, so 51% of the electorate goes to that candidate.
Right.
49 to the other.
No, and I like that. I just thought, how do they organize in a way that would be? Is it just literally the people who have? Is it the representatives? Is it the House?
No, they're not the electoral voters.
No, there's a separate entity that are electoral vote. But so the way that you figure out how many electorates you get is by your senators plus your representatives. So
and representatives is based off population. So it's 2 plus your population.
Basically.
Representation.
Mm-hmm. But so in that way, that's the only difference I can see. If you do everything proportional, that every state gets at least 3 votes instead of...
Right.
So maybe it is still better to do that than to just go...
I think it makes a lot more sense. And I think you'd have a political discussion that'd be more representative of the whole country.
I agree. Totally.
Which is funny because I feel like a lot of conservatives, after Trump won, thinks the Electoral College ensures that more voices are heard than not.
Yeah.
A lot of conservatives seem to think that the Electoral College ensures that they're not going to get drowned out by California or New York.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But if it's proportionate, everyone would have more of a voice, I feel like. Maybe we should do more research into this, because I've only just started thinking about it.
It would be interesting to get more into it.
See the counter arguments and stuff.
My deal, but I don't know.
But anyway. Yeah, so that's my take on the midterms. It wasn't, as far as the battle in the Democratic Party goes, it was not conclusive one way or the other. A lot of strong progressives did win. Then in other places they lost. So both sides are claiming that their narrative is validated.
Don't they always?
Okay, and then do you guys want to talk about France?
Absolutely. I mean,
Fuck the French.
so what have you guys? I'm curious to see what you guys have heard about it, because it's interesting. After I've done some deeper dives into it, seeing the difference between like the mainstream media narrative and then like people on the ground, what they're saying, and I mean, what's your guys' take on it so far?
I really know like the bare minimum. I know that there were protests that were happening. They got a little bit of what they wanted, but now there's even more protests than there were previous, because they kind of see that there's like that kind of weakness, or however you wish to view it. So now they're wanting more and trying to use that as like a political move to get the country back to the way they think that it should go. But that's basically all I know.
Yeah. So I mean, my understanding of it was that, I mean, there's been like a long simmering issue there over austerity ever since the 2008 crash, where more and more of their social welfare policies have been chipped away at, and taxes on the rich have been chipped away at, and stuff like that. And Macron has had really low approval ratings from the beginning. He almost lost to Marine Le Pen, who's essentially a Trump-style, right winger. And so a lot of people think Macron only won because he was up against someone most of the French didn't want. And he's just a classic establishment corporate liberal, just essentially serving the rich and mouth service to liberal stuff and all of that. And they taxed diesel, I think it was. And it was like a huge jump. Like they were paying like $6 something per gallon.
Per gallon or per liter?
I think it was per gallon.
Is this U.S. dollars?
Don't
or
they
is
do
this...
liter over there?
I'm not sure.
They do, but
this would be worth looking up.
The stats might have
but
been
it went through the roof, and there was a huge backlash because a lot of people who are like truck drivers and that kind of thing, they have to pay for their own gas over there. And so there was this huge backlash. And normally, like, the protest movements in France are like people in Paris, but these are people coming from the countryside.
Oh, really?
At first. And the whole yellow vest thing is because they're required by law, all people who have to drive for a living, they have to keep a yellow vest in their truck.
Interesting.
For visibility during any kind of emergency. So they all brought their yellow vests out. And that's how the protests started.
That's cool. Unifying.
Yeah. And
it's a $5.54 per gallon.
Yikes.
So twice as much as Oregon.
Yeah.
Almost 2.5.
And so they were really upset about that. And it caught like wildfire. So it's been growing and growing and growing. Right now they have the approval of 77% of the French people.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
And so it's approaching a crisis for the government. And so one of the main narratives the mainstream media try to throw out there is like, well, this is anti-climate. However, they released because it was against a gas tax.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, damn. They actually, in October, it was up at $6.77 a gallon.
I'm pretty sure that these.
So they've lowered it since the protest.
And now it is apparently $6.14. This is from globalpetrolprices.com. So
interesting.
We'll see. I mean,
diesel's less environmentally harmful than gas.
Is it?
Yeah,
I don't know about that.
It is. It's based on the amount of emissions per gallon are higher, but the amount of the energy density is also higher. So the amount of emissions per mile are lower.
Gotcha. Yeah. So anyway, more and more people have been showing up, especially on the weekends. It fills up big time. They had like over 100,000 people one day. I mean, it's getting really big, and it's growing every weekend. And they have 77% approval. They have refused to pick leaders because it's common understanding within French society that that's a way to have your movement destroyed, is you pick leaders and then the establishment brings them in and offers you a few concessions, and then they get you to disperse the movement.
Nice.
And so they've maintained a horizontal organizational structure, and it's not left or right wing. It's apparently just the French people. Like they released 42 demands, and some of them were things about like slowing immigration and stuff like that. So there is some right wing expression as well. But I felt like most of it was pretty left wing. Things like, repealing the tax cuts for the rich, raising the minimum wage, all these different things that are pretty progressive. And they included a lot of good stuff, a few environmental policies in there.
That's good.
Which I think they did intentionally be like, this is not about the environment.
Right.
This is about you squeezing the average man. Like
Yeah.
we want a country for the people, not for the wealthy.
Totally. That is something I was thinking about with the gas tax, because, putting a gas tax in place is a good like cap and trade style way to reduce emissions,
Right.
But obviously, if you don't have alternatives, then you are disproportionately taxing.
Yeah, the average,
Poor.
especially if the economic situation is already stressful.
Yeah.
And I think it's something like 70% of emissions are the result of just like 100 companies or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that would be. I haven't looked at that number.
The idea that you would seek to, cause those changes by taxing the average consumer instead of targeting the way business operates.
Well, I think there's there's so many issues with that. Like, you can just think of the fact that, like, if there's no other alternative, all you do is limit that kind of resource and that kind of, that like sector, basically, of transporting goods. Like, what you got to be able to have your truckers.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to get things from one place to another? They're shipping everything.
Yeah.
So, you got to be able to, it would be like, put a tax on something and then put benefits on another thing so that it's easy for people to say, hey, let's just switch over to that thing.
Well, it's definitely caused a really positive debate about what climate policy needs to look like and how it needs to be paid for.
Totally.
And the idea that we're facing this, problem within the context of a system dominated by the rule of the wealthy. Yeah. And so a lot of the policies that are being put in place are, spreading the burden out onto the common people instead of targeting where it should.
Right.
So that's caused a very fruitful debate, I think.
Yeah, totally. No, I think that's good. I think, I would like to look into the climate policy stuff because I haven't looked into it. And it's like, I understand that it's a fragile thing because of how much of the infrastructure that's already been created is not centered in, global warming or any climate change stuff whatsoever. So I know that it's going to be a difficult transfer. It's going to be a difficult change, but it seems pretty straightforward to me, but I'm probably simplifying it. So I would like to look into.
Yeah, it was really interesting too, because all the mainstream media outlets are highlighting like them setting cars on fire and like some of the violent aspects of it and trying to like poo-poo on the movement. Yeah. But when they went and interviewed all these average people, they were like regular French people, and they were like, yeah, this is a movement with no centralized leadership of all the French people. You're going to have people who come out looking to make trouble. Of course. Yeah. It's a mass meeting of the population. Like, what do you expect? Yeah. But the vast majority are committed to nonviolence and all this stuff, and they have like the support of almost all the French people. Right. But the media is just focusing on that with a laser, trying to shut it down. Yeah. And it's already spreading to other countries in Europe. It actually had a huge flare-up in surrounding countries during this climate summit in Poland. And some of the groups protesting over the climate started wearing yellow vests.
Nice. Dude, it's pretty depressing that it's now even that, like, if the media is covering something a certain way, it's almost better to, like, think the opposite way.
Yep.
That is like...
Yeah, I do that a lot. Is I think, okay, what narrative do they seem to be circling around, and what does that mean in terms of what narratives they're trying to squash? Yeah. Which is shitty. to think that our media is so owned
Well,
by
because it used to be the exact
concentrated wealth
opposite
and
of
power.
that. Like,
Yeah.
or at least the ideal of it is the
Yeah.
exact opposite.
Yeah, wow. That's like an adaptation to media being a voice for the powerful rather than a critique of the powerful.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yay.
But yeah, there was some really encouraging stuff at that climate summit, though. Not
Ooh.
from the stuff in the summit itself, but
Mhm.
from the activism outside.
Mhm.
Like, there was this girl from Sweden. It's like 14, 15 years old.
Hmm.
And she refused to go to class. She would stand on the sidewalk outside the school demanding
Wow.
action on climate change and demanding students globally start striking on climate change.
Wow.
And it started
That's awesome.
spreading. Schools all over Europe, there's having walkouts. And
Was that the girl that I think I might have seen on Facebook that was
probably. She
saying-
gave an amazing speech.
Yeah, yeah.
Democracy Now! Covered it.
Yeah, basically talking about how our
Our
older
leaders are
generations,
children. And
yeah, are stealing
Nice.
are
Yeah.
stealing from their children.
Oh yeah.
And that's, I mean, yeah, that's definitely been my sentiment mostly for everything. I mean, the fact that it's like, if you look at just resources and wealth in general,
Yeah.
talking about like, the climate as well, it just seems as though there's a really weird structure of like the older generation not feeling as though they need to provide for the younger generations.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's just so ironic that the generations that reaped the harvest of the New Deal then tore it apart and are dancing in the ashes. But anyway. Yeah, so that's been interesting.
It'll definitely be interesting to see where it goes.
And it's really encouraging to me when I see movements like this happen, because I just think it reminds people that they can force their governments to do stuff if they get out there. And so we can argue about the nuance of particular policy or particular tactics, but I'm always in favor of that growth of class consciousness, that idea that, if we unite and get out in the streets and shut shit down, we can force the institutions of power to respond.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lesson we desperately need to re-understand.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that political outlet is definitely something that we should know about. Obviously, for me, I'd like the more constructive approach, I guess, is the way to think about it. But
I feel like that's... See, yeah, we always get here.
I know, I'm
But
just...
I feel like that's better for times when
Yes.
of stability.
And I agree with you on that. I do think it's a good thing that this is showing an example of an alternative way if it's not working out, because ultimately I do care most about the greatest number of people living in the least amount of suffering.
Well, it's that old debate between, reform or revolution. And I think the answer to that question is different during different times.
I agree.
So
I agree.
I lean more towards revolution right now.
Yeah.
Peaceful revolution.
Nonviolent.
We always got to
Civil
do that.
disobedience.
I think people still have a pretty good idea that most
We don't want the
revolutions
French
are...
Revolution again.
Yes,
We don't-
seriously. Do you see why it's difficult here?
I know.
Because right now they're doing a French Revolution, but that makes
They're
people...
keeping it nonviolent besides,
Yeah.
the little fringe stuff, tipping cars over and whatnot. I don't care about property.
Well, they're not
myself.
freaking cutting heads off, so
Yeah.
that's, I guess, we're on the
Pretty
plus. We're on the plus
Historically
side.
speaking.
Yes.
It was really cool listening to these, there was grandmas out there, all these regular
Wow.
people, and one of the older guys was like, "This doesn't feel like a revolution yet, but it feels like the start of revolution."
Cool.
It was really cool. But anyway,
That's cool.
oh, I love
That energy has got to be pretty sweet.
I gotta say, it makes me so disappointed in Americans when I see how quickly the French get out and demand change when stuff's not going the way they want.
Yeah, that's true.
They are so much more
They've always been
activistic.
Well, they're also, this is something that, again, Jordan Peterson would, this is where you guys would probably just, well, I think you guys would agree, but just see it, you seeing it positive, him seeing it negative. But he talks about how the French have been notoriously bad when it comes to logical standpoints, when it comes to political change. They almost always go off of their feelings. If something is wrong, they're not going to look first to reform. They're going to look first to revolt.
Right.
So that's and he's a very logically oriented individual. So he always looks at that.
Well, I mean, when I look at, what the French achieved by doing that.
Yeah.
It makes logical sense to me. And then, especially in a time where we need radical change, that's the only thing that can even do anything.
Yeah, it's very effective.
It's very effective.
Yeah.
And you know what? I just believe in citizens having control over their government. And if that means when the government stops listening to you, you get out and make some noise, then that sounds just dandy to me. I don't like the idea of leaving it up to technocrats to decide how things are going to reform, because eventually that deteriorates into class rule, I think.
I think they should put a lot more effort into trying to make it more robust, though. Make the revolution stick,
Right.
So they don't have to keep doing it.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's the hard thing. Is
hard.
Usually you win a few concessions and then you go home.
Yeah.
But you're not dealing with the root problem, which is why this one's kind of encouraging, because they're refusing to go home. They're refusing to, develop a leadership that they think will compromise the long term.
For sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. This was when I heard him say that, it was on an older interview. So I would actually be really interested to see how he would view this one.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Because most of the time he's really griping on the whole postmodernism and how most of that came from French.
Oh, well, that's French intellectuals.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to poo-poo on, revolutionary people's movements, and then yet at the same time claim to be defending the legacy of the Enlightenment, you kind of got a little bit of a dissonance there, bud, in my view.
Yeah. Yeah, which is, that
is the age of revolutions.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So it would be interesting to see how he would think about this. But
yeah. Well, I'm encouraged.
Yes, ultimately I think ultimately I think it's going well. If they're getting things that seem reasonable and they're doing it in a way that's not violent, then great.
I mean, the ideal would be what I'm hoping for long term. I don't know if it's going to happen with this movement. What I'm looking out for is the sparking of a international people's movement, both against the rule of wealth, which is a national or an international issue right now, and the climate crisis.
Totally. That would be awesome.
I'd like to see a convergence of movements, of people's movements around that. And international solidarity.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I think that would be. I think that's easier than we think it is too. I think economically, we even live in an atmosphere where it could work really well.
And that's why tactical things like the Yellow Vest or like the Occupy movement that sparked in the United States and also spread internationally, those kinds of tactics are really important to kind of set the flame off, because it gives people something to circle around symbolically.
No, totally. One thing that actually popped into my mind when I was thinking about this earlier was I wanted to ask you if you think that it would be beneficial to always have this kind of some form of group that's doing some sort of protest towards something.
Oh yeah, I think even if you have problems with their demands or various aspects of what they're doing, I think always having people out there to put pressure on the ruling class is necessary and will lead to more good than bad, even if you want to critique the nuance of that particular group's actions.
Yeah, because the thing that comes into my head, even from a standpoint of that more constructionist, I guess would be the way to say it, but point of view is to really learn to adapt to that kind of occurrence. So if there is a constant protest, it's you have to be willing to listen to that group. Yeah. Because they're the ones who, if you treat them correctly, they may be protesting all the time, which make it annoying, but that's, part of your job as a political official is to listen to those people who are kind of trying to. And you should
consider the people who are the quickest to respond to that happening in the population as, I think, a very positive thing, because they're going to be the first ones to let you know that something unsustainable is going on.
Totally.
And if you leave something like that to fester long enough, you're looking at much bigger disruptions to society. Totally. Than if you deal with them when they first are happening.
Exactly. Well, you deal with them in a way that you have to try to understand them.
So and you have to try and ameliorate the circumstances that are leading to that emotional reaction.
Totally, and know when they're going to get violent, and obviously work towards meeting those demands. You don't have to meet all of their demands because there's obviously some camaraderie or some. There's a I think a kind of like it's a culture, that like people like to aim towards something they see as better, and really the only things that they know how to do is to be really passionate about it. Right. And they can, like, if they get a culture surrounding that and understanding that one of the best ways to get done what they need to get done is to take that passion and make it explicit and like get really good like law or policy, then I think everyone wins at that.
What's really exciting too is all the recent articles coming out that are covering the movement are saying that there's growing discussion among the movement over a new National Assembly, which was what they did with the French Revolution. They overthrew the old government, had a National Assembly to construct a new government and constitution.
Interesting.
So, I mean, they're even going back to their real roots.
Yeah. I hope that doesn't lead to violence. I feel like that would be...
I hope none of this leads to violence, but getting serious about fundamental reform is encouraging to me.
Yeah, I think that there could be a really cool, constructive way to allow this kind of constant protest.
Yeah.
And then also to adapt to it in a way that isn't... Obviously, the negative side to there being protests all the time is first you have a lot of your population that's not contributing to the systems in place already, which is kind of the point, right? But the problem with that is that there are obviously really important jobs that need to get done. Yeah. And if they're a part of that class, then you're kind of, everyone gets screwed after a while.
Yeah.
So,
but that's the idea is like, if things are going downhill consistently, then people are going to be okay with exacerbating that in the short term in order to end the long-term decline.
But I'm talking about this because to me it almost comes to me as like this is kind of another type of politician. The people who go out and protest are another type of politician where they're actually listening to and feeling themselves an issue that they have with the country, and they're going to use some political form of pressure to get things done. That's not through voting. Yeah. It's like through another form of political action, which seems cool because it seems as though it's, for me, I always like the other piece. What's the other piece to it? We have a voting system where everything is very constructive, very kind of slow, bureaucratic, and it sometimes turns up really cool things because you can be more thoughtful, but also can turn into like this super crazy 20 bills that you're signing at one time because you had to do
and
this.
And the more corrupt the system is, the worse that process is going to be.
Totally.
So you just get partisan gridlock and bills that are just passed because of donor money. And so it actually becomes an impediment, I think, to constructive reform.
Well,
and at that point, that's when it's time for revolution in my mind.
Well, and
it's reform has slowed to an unmeaningful halt.
Totally.
And that means it's time to shake things up.
Totally. And that's where it interests me to have a consistent form of this kind of protest.
Right.
That's because it will, to me, it's the balancing act. Yeah. That's the balancing side to the voting. Yeah. Is to having this other form of political pressure that you can create.
I love just whether it's listening to political commentators or seeing discussion in comment sections. Mm-hmm. Seeing the energy from the Yellow Vest protests over there, just kind of infecting, and contributing to that energy spreading to other people. I love seeing that that tension rise.
Totally.
We could do something.
Totally.
I love it.
Yeah,
I think that's why they try to shut it down in the media.
Yeah.
Because they don't want it to spread like that.
Yeah, which is really sad. I get that. It's kind of it's just the tyrant parent who's just worried about their kids getting a little bit too rambunctious and it's going to break everything. And it's
that is also kind of you're attributing a lot of nefariousness to the media, where it could just be that they think that showing the cars on fire is just going to make them more money,
That's fair. There's the income factor or the ratings. Mm-hmm. I think also a lot of Western media is kind of part of the ruling class now. Not necessarily in the fact that they have a lot of power, but that's the world they live in.
Yeah.
They're elbow to elbow with the powerful, and they think things are great and
Right.
the system's awesome and they didn't get hired to rock the boat and all that jazz.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a certain amount of that, but I also just think that the push for ratings would push them towards
Yeah.
the shit
Sensationalism.
that- yeah, exactly.
But it's just like, I agree with you on that. It's just now we're going to be talking about whether or not it's conscious or unconscious. Because either way, they're playing to the game of the politicians.
Well, I definitely think it's conscious that they're going for the sensationalist
Yeah.
stuff. I don't necessarily think that it's conscious that they're undermining the revolution.
Exactly.
That,
exactly.
I think,
No, I
is
agree.
going too far.
But I agree with that. But I'm just saying that would be, they're still doing that. So it's just whether or not we're going to like place blame on them, which I never really like looked to place blame, but it's just more being aware of what their effect on the situation is.
Right.
Because obviously they're not trying to observe the situation objectively, which almost always that's what or at least let's say in the past the media has kind of done that.
That's
Well,
what they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
It's difficult because, like, I mean, I see media's fundamental role as a check on power as much as it is about educating people. And so to me, it should always be on the side of the people and critiquing the powerful. And yeah, call out excesses if there are excesses in the actions of the people. But, I mean, I feel like the vast majority of the time it's the opposite way, buttressing the arguments of the powerful and, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see how much of it is actually trying to do that, trying to like sway it in the politician's point of view.
Yeah.
You do see it. I mean, you see where it could come from just because of the monetary.
And I really don't think
It's like-
most of that is like like an intentional thing. I
Yeah.
think that's just kind of like the way it goes unconsciously because of the nature of those companies.
Well, and it's almost
Yeah.
it's almost a really shitty situation because the people who are supposed to be that really like aware, conscious of the I guess like what's occurring, that like the not the data necessarily, but like maybe like the meta issues that are occurring. That seemed to be that was like the investigative journalist kind of idea.
Wait,
Seemed
journalism
to be
used to be about like the muckrakers, fucking digging
exactly.
out, stories about the powerful. But I mean, now you have, any journalist on cable is going to be making, big bucks, and
Yeah.
they like things the way they are, and they've bought the narrative of America being, the golden city on the hill,
Which,
and
Again, I
that
think
all of our foreign wars are benevolent and all of that.
there's almost always this. It's reaching that equilibrium point, I think, for how our media works now. It's like the equilibrium point of where there was this check on the system that was in place that obviously needed to be checked. But what happened was eventually the system incorporated that part of the system, that part of the check, I guess. And so now there needs to be another check. Because there always will be. It's like we can't ever become complacent in that whole, it's kind of utopianism, thinking that we don't need to have a check on our systems.
Right.
That's like...
Yeah, well, the system of checks and balances works well until you add another power structure outside of it that can influence all of the systems. Right?
Exactly.
And that's what we have now with our economic system, where money rules everything.
Right.
And so that is sort of the ruling power, and there's not really a good check on that.
Yeah, and in my head, the first thing that comes to mind there is just that we need to understand that everything is not even materialistic in the sense that there is a monetary value. Like, the only way to be compensated is through a material means. There's also the means of any kind of reputation or any kind of social responsibility. It's kind of like the idea, like one of the things I always hear Jordan Peterson say is that like there's a hierarchy because the burrito distribution, the people who do the most work should get the most money. And like that logic is totally, I think it's pretty sound.
Yeah.
The problem is that also there's an underlying premise that the only way for those people who are creating the most to get compensated is through money, which is not true. There's an emotional and social benefit to being a leader that creates lots of things.
Yeah.
And if we don't ever recognize that, if we don't, because if we don't ever recognize that, then it will disappear. At least to them, it'll definitely disappear.
Well, I think that we definitely do have some elements of prestige in our culture. It's just that we don't necessarily put them in places that make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Celebrity and
Exactly.
bullshit like that.
And I think it's great to try and reevaluate where those are, but I also think it's really hard to do. And I
We're
think
very bad at distributing honor in this society.
Exactly. Finding a way to do that well would be awesome, but I think we also need to find a way to check the thing that will always be an incentive, which is the material world.
Totally. I just think that it's incorrect if you just look at the system and say that the only way to compensate is materialistic, which seems to be the only way to defend the wealth inequality right now.
Yeah.
It seems as though the only way to defend it is to say that the people who work the hardest should get the most money.
And it's not like you shouldn't compensate those people more. It's just how much more. You don't have to go overboard, you know?
Totally.
Like the Mondragon thing, 8 times the lowest paid is what the highest paid gets.
Yeah.
Something like that makes perfect goddamn sense.
Yeah, totally.
And it's also, recognizing something that's very fundamental to any human community or society, small or large, which is that you have to recognize that even if you have certain people who contribute more than others, it's a team effort,
Yeah.
And something else that I think would be valuable is to reevaluate our tax structure and try to target those systems of rent seeking,
right,
and tax them enough that they're not a huge issue anymore.
Yeah,
because the fact that is such a huge source of income is a huge problem because it's not creating wealth.
Yeah,
and that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, the whole housing market's actually really weird.
It's really weird. Yeah,
yeah,
it's gross too.
Yeah. I definitely think there should be bare bones, basic public housing available for the poorest in society.
Yeah,
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, dude.
I mean, we have more empty homes than we have homeless people.
It blows.
In what world is that?
They have that for seniors, but not for.
Well,
and they have some for small families that are.
Yeah.
Again,
it's very, especially in this country, it's not very inclusive.
It's the same thing with the freaking healthcare. It's the same kind of people need a base necessity for things that obviously take away from our economy. People who get sick all the time are going to take away from our economy, regardless of if they have insurance or not.
Yeah.
And if we have people living on the streets during cold weather or any time of the year, they will obviously get sick more.
Yeah.
It's
shocking.
I know.
And if we have people that are not able to get mental health help when they need it, then they're obviously going to cause problems
and get more sick.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those things that's almost annoying because you just look at it and
it's
you're
super annoying. It's annoying because there's a good logical argument for it without even going into the humanitarian argument.
Yeah.
And the humanitarian argument is pretty compelling.
Those are always my favorite.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, rhetoric and logic line up. It's just oh.
And then we're still nah.
Yeah, right? Okay, now you're just a motherfucker.
Right? Yeah.